Hi, this is Paul Christopher Hoppy, aka Giant Buddha of PokerIsASkill.com. I'm bringing you Hand of the Day, number 4. We're going to get back to some no-limit hold'em here. Not too much to say. Let's just get right into the action. Here we are with a pair of sixes on the button. There's a limper from the low jack, so 3 off the button. That's the earliest position you're going to have in a 6 max game. As you see here, the VPIP is 26 and the PFR is 6. So for those of you who are not so familiar with stats, VPIP is voluntarily put in pot. So that means this player puts money in with about a quarter of his or her hands. That's kind of average for a decent player, or it's a little bit high. But the PFR, the PR there, that's a pre-flop raise, that player's only raising 6% of their hands. So that's very low. So it's that gap between the first and second number that give us a pretty clear indication, even with only 32 hands of data. That's what this last number means. That's how many hands we've played against this player. Even with only 32 hands of data, a gap that large indicates probably a weaker player, and we see them open limping, and then we're pretty certain that's a weaker player. But that said, that's not a really huge VPIP, so we can expect this might not be a terrible player, probably just a somewhat bad one. And some of these stats are wrong. This 92 big blinds, that's supposed to be how many bets they have, how many blinds they have in their stack, but this is 101 blinds, so that's not right. I'm not sure what's up with that. And then we have 3-bet is 0%, C-bet is 100%. So the once or no, it looks like 2 times that this player ever raised in their life, or when we were at the table, they happened to C-bet. Fold to C-bet 40%. That's, I guess, I don't know. That's not that high. And that's about it. That's the stats that we have here. Now there's a pop-up, but one point I'll bring up is that I might not have had all of these stats on this player when this hand came, so it's not such a big consideration. But someone asked me to sort of get into the HUD a bit and how that affects my decisions. And it will affect some decisions throughout the hand as it comes up. I make it 3.5 big blinds. It's kind of a smallish raise. I'm doing that for a couple reasons. One, I like to keep the stacks relatively deeper when I'm in position. You could certainly raise to 4 or 5 big blinds here. That would be totally fine. I think 3 would probably be too few. You get the blinds to come along a little too often. So this is sort of a compromise where I'm keeping the pot a little bit smaller, but I'm raising enough that we're not going to get too many calls. I wouldn't expect this player to limp and then fold very often, so I don't think my raise size will affect that decision. The reason I wouldn't expect them to limp and fold very often is, number one, people don't do that often anymore, and mostly number two, the lower VPIP indicates a tighter range, which just means I think, they're looking at a hand decent enough that they want to play it. Okay, so enough of pre-flop. Everybody folds except that player who calls, and the flop comes. Not a great flop for a c-bet, but I stick one out there anyway. Again, a few reasons. This player could certainly have smaller pocket pairs, could have some ace-x hands, could have some hands like ace-jack, doesn't seem that likely, king-jack, more likely, jack-9. Also by c-betting, I preserve the right, or the credibility to bluff later in the hand if I want to. If I check it back and then get bet into, I think I'm going to fold the best hand a fair amount of the time. I'd rather avoid that. So I go ahead and put the bet out, even though this is a board that probably hits my opponent reasonably in their range, but it also hits my hand, my raising range pretty well. So when these cards come out, I think I'm not going to get messed with too much by a player like this. I think this is also a player that will play fairly honestly, pretty straight up, and I'd like to encourage that by just sticking a bet out there and sort of letting them tell me more or less what their hand is. Okay, so they call pretty quickly, and the turn is a 4, which is a total blank. It's a good card for me. It means if I was ahead, I'm still ahead unless they had pocket 4s. A hand like 3-4 seems pretty unlikely for a player that's not super loose. So, uh, do I want to put another bet here or not? Well, yes and no. The arguments for putting another bet are twofold. One, if I put in another bet, then I might be able to get a better hand to fold. I'm not so optimistic about that with a player who's um, kind of on the passive, maybe bad side. I think better hands are usually going to be calling here. Betting gets draws to pay, but that's not such a big deal when I'm not that confident I have the best hand. Checking could have the opposite benefits of inducing some action, maybe getting a bluff on the river. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit hard to call a bluff. There's $18 in the pot. If they bet about 12, it's going to be a tough call on the end. A lot of river cards are going to be really disgusting, like an ace, a king, a jack, a 9, even an 8. Those are all going to look pretty bad because they either make straights or they give better pairs than a 6 to a lot of the straight draws. Like a jack 9 would get there on an 8 or a king, but a jack or a 9 would also give that hand a pair. So diamonds also would be pretty bad. So what I'm going to do is something a bit unusual, which is bet $1, which is the minimum. And you might snidely think that this is my limit hold'em background, saying, "Oh, min bet, min bet, min bet," but that's not really what's going on. The idea is pre-flop, my opponent limped and then called a raise. So basically, they limped and then didn't 3-bet. So they're basically saying, "Well, my hand's not that good, but it's okay." And then on the flop, they checked, and I bet $5, which was a little more than half pot. And they called and didn't raise. And again, they're saying, my hand's not that good, but it's okay. And on the turn, they checked again, and they're saying basically, well, my hand's not that good. So what I'm doing by betting the $1 is I'm essentially saying, really? Like, is your hand not that good? And this player's response to that is going to give me a lot of sort of room on the river. It's going to give me a lot of information. And if I get check raised, I'm very doubtful that I would get check raised here. I think it's very unlikely. If I do get check raised, I'd probably go ahead and fold. Although you could make a case for playing back at them or even just calling down or something like that. But I would probably just go ahead and fold unless it was like something stupid at $2 or $3 or something like that, which would be kind of funny. They'd be flipping it around on me and they'd be like, "Well, really? You want to bet $1? I'll bet $1. I'll raise you $1." But I don't expect that to happen very often. Most of the time, I think this player is just going to check call. I think they're almost never going to check fold for the $1. But what it does, and let's just get to that. So they call, and then the river's a 2. What it does is they're just going to check here a lot of the time on the river, because if I checked it back, then that's sort of like me saying, well, maybe I have a showdownable hand, maybe I'm giving up. And so then they're either going to say, okay, I have a good hand, I'm going to bet for value, or they're going to say, well, he's giving up, so I missed my draw, so I'm going to bluff. So if I check it back, pretty much any pair better than mine, maybe not 7s, 8s, and 9s, but I think any queen, maybe a 10, is going to value bet here, and then some draws might bluff. So I get myself in that situation where I know he's going to have better hands than me that are value betting, because it's just very clear that a hand like Queen Jack or even Ace 10, something like that, is just very clearly the best hand. So that player is going to just be able to bet that all the time. But then there's also hands like King Jack, Jack 9, some diamond draws, stuff like that, where they might be bluffing it, they might not, and I'm not really going to be in a comfortable position to be able to make my mind up about that. So I'm kind of avoiding that by betting the $1 on the turn, where, if you put yourself in the other person's shoes, you could say, well, I'm just going to ignore that $1 on the turn, or I'm going to say, okay, that means weakness, so I'm going to bluff now, or I'm going to bluff the river. And that might be a reasonable approach for a good player, for a sophisticated player. But I think a lot of players, and especially players that tend towards the passive, which this player does, as we see with that only 6% pre-flop raising percentage. I think that sort of player is going to think, why'd he bet $1? He's just going to be sitting there thinking, is he trying to trap me? Is he trying to get me to check raise him, and then he's going to raise more? I don't know. I'm just going to check this down. And if he has a draw, I think he's just going to say whatever. I'm just going to give up. And if he has even a value hand that's a little better than mine, I think he's also gonna check it down. And a value hand that's a little worse than mine, like ace four, I don't think he's gonna think, oh, maybe I'll bet this, or fives. I think it's just gonna be like, whatever, I'm just gonna check it to you. And I expect to get checked to here on the river close to all the time. So that $1 that I bet on the turn, a lot of the times you can bet the turn for a showdown. You're basically betting to say, okay, I'm gonna bet now, and then they don't know whether you're gonna bet the river or not, and then you check back the river. Just so you get to see the showdown. But here what I'm doing is I'm betting the $1 for the showdown, and so it's a super cheap showdown. And against a sophisticated player or an aggressive player or an erratic player, that might be a very bad play. It's possible it would be a very bad play. I think it's actually an underrated play that can work against a lot of types of players, but those are the types of players that you should be a lot more cautious about using it against. You don't really want to give too much information there and sort of give them another chance to bet raise the turn. Essentially, it's like a second time they could bet, because you've already kind of told them you're not really that interested. So that's a dangerous play against certain types of players. But a player like this seems fairly straightforward, not very bluff happy, passive, I think it can be a fairly powerful tool. So, I do check it back, and then my opponent shows up with King Jack, which was exactly the sort of hand that could have semi-bluffed the flop if it were that sort of player. Certainly could have, I could have charged him more on the turn, but first of all, my money's not going in great against any kind of straight draw. I mean, it's going in good, but this player's got like 14 outs. To beat me on the turn there. So that's you could say, oh, well, they have so many outs, so you should make them fold. Well, they're not going to fold, right? I mean, you're not going to bet so much, because if you do, then a queen or a 10, you're just giving up value to that. So I'm not even confident that I'm ahead of this person's range, because when I'm ahead, and they've got 14 outs, or 11 outs if they have a gut shot or something like that. But all the straight draws that he could have flopped all have 2 overcards. So my equity isn't that great when I'm ahead. When I'm behind, they have a bigger pair, and I have 2 outs. Unless they have something like Queen X of diamonds, which is unlikely but possible. And then I have 1 out. So, I never have better than 2 outs unless I'm actually ahead like I am here. So given that, the money on the turn won't even go in that well, so charging someone to draw, it doesn't really make that much sense. So the only real argument for betting larger on the turn for me would be to possibly set up a bigger river bluff on certain cards, and that's certainly worth considering. But against this player, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to bet $1, let them basically turn their hand face up, and have them just check the river to me, and have that just give me a chance to just take a cheap showdown. And it worked out pretty well this game. That doesn't mean it's necessarily the best play, but it clearly can work, and it did this time. Once again, this is Paul Christopher Hoppy, aka Giant Buddha, with Hand of the Day for PokerIsASkill.com. Leave your questions and comments on the website, and I'll be happy to get back to you. Cheers.